Okay, so for those who may have been watching or who will watch later, this is part 2 of the reading of tonight's reading of the Great Cosmic Letter, Rediscovering the Religion of the Earth. I had some technical difficulties and had to go reboot my internet, so I am picking up. I've been reading so far in chapter 20, 12 Circling Dancers. So I will continue where I left off, which you can see in the previous video. Let's see. The cult of Dionysus and the wild women was popular with common people, especially those in the countryside far into Roman times. Central to this cult were the ancient mushroom mysteries, the communal eating of hallucinogenic psilocybin called the holy body of Dionysus, the spotted scarlet flycap, Amanita muscaria, referred to as Christ's body by Hebrew and early Christian cultists. There is no doubt that all the ancient religious experience was associated with, if it did not originate in the hallucinogenic experience, and that this was under the tutelage of women, the great Stone Age pharmacologists. Anthropologist Jacquetta Hawkes also believes that the ecstatic mystery religion of Dionysus, the tender-faced and curly-haired son of the Cretan Great Mother, which was originally the cult of the great goddess herself and her wild orgiastic women. I swear. And her wild, what the, I swear, this is working against me this evening. I do not know what is going on. Okay. And her wild, orgiastic women. When we think of the love and death god Dionysus surrounded by white, wild, mad women, our minds fly back immediately to that old Stone Age cave in northeast Spain, with the hugely genitaled young man surrounded by a crescent of 9 moon phase women all dancing. This was the young man who became the Neolithic sun lover of the goddess and eventually Christ. In the Cretan myth, Dionysus was the bisexual son of the mother, raised as a girl among women. Throughout the Near East and the Aegean, he was known by many names: Attis, Adonis, Tammuz, Damazi, Osiris. Jesus was called Adonai, Lord, after the erotic prototype Adonis. As a vegetation god, he was ritually sacrificed, usually on a tree, prototype of the later crucifix. His flesh was eaten as bread, his blood drunk as wine. Dionysus is the god of the wine, the divine intoxication. This ritual sacrifice in the harvest season was believed to be necessary for the land's fertility. The immortal son's mortal part, his flesh and blood energies, were cut up and sprinkled on the field. The Christ idea was in no way original with the Hebrews of Bible times, but inherited by them. And along with the Paradise Garden myths, flood myths, and an entire birth, death, rebirth ritual cosmology from the entire Neolithic agricultural great goddess religion of the Near East. They added to all this just one new twist: the incorporation of the mother's son into a strictly patriarchal ontology. In From Ritual to Romance, English scholar Jesse Weston traced the red thread from these Neolithic mother goddess and son lover sacrifice god mystery cults into early Christian mysticism, and also into pagan European legends of the Grail, the sacred quest, and the healing of the wasteland, which became merged with Christian romance. 20th century poets like T.S. Eliot drew heavily on her discoveries and ideas without giving her much credit, but turned the spirit quest into one of the patriarchal Christian despair and resignation, rather than a courageous and ecstatic return and reintegration with the goddess. Poetry was originally oral, the chant of ecstatic dance and entranced prophecy. Long before the Song of Songs, Near Eastern erotic poetry was the expression of the love cycle of Inanna and Dumazi, Ishtar and Tumaz, the goddess and her son lover. The Song of Songs itself is clearly a pre-patriarchal chant of ecstasy back to the black goddess. Among the North African Berbers and other pre-Islamic Moorish peoples in the region that is now Morocco and Algeria, it was the women who traditionally made, chanted, and sang the lyric love poetry. This tradition was undoubtedly once spread throughout Western and Northern Africa. According to Brithfault in his fascinating book Troubadours, these Moorish women's song forms and erotic love poetries were carried by the Moors into Spain and the French provincial region and were the seed of the troubadour tradition that flourished in the Middle Ages. This tradition became European lyric poetry. That is the end of chapter 20. Chapter 21. Earth Spirit, Serpent Spirals, and Blind Springs. To all ancient people, the earth was alive, a great animal inhabited by a life spirit or soul substance. All phenomena were manifestations of this divine force. And after death, all forms return to this source before passing into another animate existence. The earth spirit was the central transformer of all life energies into the multiplicity of life forms, all protoplasmatically connected with each other as in the same body, the same imagination. And the Gaia hypothesis, Earth is defined as a living, breathing, and co-responding body, creating its own atmosphere, filling its own needs, relieving its own stresses. Far from the patriarchal mechanical model of Earth as a merely passive receiver of stimuli from the sun and sky, this new model shows us an intentional organism exhibiting will and direction and quite capable of reciprocal relations with all of its creatures. In The Pattern of the Past, Guy Underwood tells of his wanderings around Britain in search of ancient roads, animal tracks, stone circles, and other megaliths. Underwood, a water dowser, describes the earth force like a magnetic current emitted by underground waters in motion and under pressure. This force is affected by the movements of the stars, the moon, and the sun. In turn, it has great penetrative powers and affects the nerve cells of animal. In turn, it has great penetrative powers and affects the nerve cells of animals and humans. Modern Western science has not yet begun to study this force, but the Russians seem to be on its track, particularly in their studies of water divining. Generated within the Earth, this force causes wave motions perpendicular to the Earth's surface. It forms spiral patterns, also mazes and labyrinths, and the spiral coils are based on multiples of 7. When manifested in spiral forms, it was seen as a catalyst with the construction of matter and with the generative powers of nature. It was a part of the mechanism by which what we call life force comes into being. She, the joyous spiral. What Underwood calls primary lines, water lines, aquastats, and track lines, were in ancient times considered healing or holy. They have remained stationary since time immemorial. Among the Celts, Helena, the goddess of the ancient tracks, was considered the first and oldest of all deities. Animals follow these tracks and use them to find suitable places to sleep and give birth. Migrations of birds and fish allowed these geodetic magnetic lines, finding their way instinctively over vast distances. Most ancient roads were aligned with these irregular and winding animal paths along the underground force lines. Another system of forces contracts and expands daily, making the earth a breathing animal indeed. Underwood found that some of these secondary lines, along with the geospirals, reverse their positions at each phase of the moon every fortnight. The ancient calendar was lunar, and among the Celts, the months commenced on the sixth day after the first new moon, while the year began on the sixth day after the first new moon following the vernal equinox. Each month was divided into two fortnightly periods. It would seem that the Celtic calendar was based upon the phenomena of fluctuation in secondary lines, since this provided an exact time once every fortnight in relation to which dates and times for rituals and religious observances could be fixed. The spiral force forms an energy network all over the Earth's surface, affecting the germination and growth of trees and plants, as well as animals. Here's the practical side of goddess mythology and symbolism. The moon, spirals, earth, water, all related to the right time to the right time to plant different kinds of seeds according to the moon's phases. Further, magic earth current is known as the serpent force, or in China, the dragon current. Raising the serpent force is a common and ancient rite among Native Americans, Hindus, Asians, Africans, and the Celts of pagan Europe. These sacred serpentine paths were followed instinctively by the first nomadic tribes. Australian Aborigines make ritual journeys along these current paths in the steps of the gods, who created the original divine landscape. They believe that each place the gods, quote, stopped became manifest reality, a spiral center of energy. The dragon, the serpent on legs, was everywhere associated with creation and life giving. As Underwood says, the serpent is the one land living vertebrae which naturally and frequently reproduces all the geodetic spiral patterns, and so it seems reasonable to assume that both the serpent and the spiral are representations of the geodetic spiral. And serpents and spirals were always associated with the goddess. Eileithyia, Cretan goddess of childbirth, was always accompanied by snakes. The umbilical cord itself is a serpentine connection between the mother and new life. The mythic relation between serpents and earth water is also ancient. Sacred pools and underground springs were always legendarily guarded by magic snakes. A blind spring is a spot from which a number of underground streams flow, forming a radiating pattern of energy. Underwood noted that cows will break out of a field to reach a blind spring and give birth to their young there. This is true of all animal mothers. Perhaps the spiral energy patterns found over blind springs could ease labor or produce healthier offspring. Doubtless, ancient women also sought out blind spring as a place for childbirth. According to Eric Newman in The Great Mother, the earliest sacred precinct of the primordial age was probably that in which the women gave birth. It is the place where the great goddess rules and from which, as still in later female mysteries, all males are excluded. Not only is the place of childbirth the sacral place for female life in early cultures, obviously it also stands at the center of all cults that are dedicated to the Great Mother as the goddess of fertility. The mysterious occurrence of menstruation and pregnancy and the dangerous episode of childbearing make it necessary for the inexperienced women to be initiated by those who are informed in the matters. This precinct is the natural, social, and psychological center of the female group, ruled over by the older, experienced women. End quote. The blind spring was the esoteric center of the old religion, as well as being the physical center of its monuments. It was holy, healing ground, a place of harmonious power where the goddess dwelt. Blind springs were to be found at the center of every prehistoric temple, as well as every medieval church in Britain and in Europe, according to Underwood. Gates of cities and temples were also set over blind springs, giving, quote, divine protection to those entering and leaving. Holy, healing, and auricular wells were sunk on blind springs, and the most ancient cities of the Near East, such as Jericho and Katal Hayuk, were built over such sacred wells. The subterranean well water was medicinal for a short season each year, when the animated spirit traveled through like an electrical current. Stones placed nearby probably served as storage batteries for its magnetic energies. The ancient idea of divine protective sanctity was expressed by encirclement. Monuments were enclosed by protective underground spirals mirrored above ground in the fountain maze or labyrinth. All burial places were surrounded by underground streams. In mythology and fairy tale, all magic castles are surrounded by a circular moat or rushing stream, and no magic rite can safely occur unless at first a protective circle is drawn around it and participants. Let's see. And the participants. There is a general association of important prehistoric sites, geodetic lines, and underground water. Guy Underwood, was a water diviner. This art, along with geodesy, the measurement of the Earth's surface, was part of the training of Celtic Druids. It was also practiced by the Scythian Aenars, who were legendarily hermaphrodites. They wore women's clothes and received their gifts of divination from Aphrodite herself. The Druids prophesied the aid of willow wands, a tree sacred to the moon goddess, and the Aenars with a wand made from yew or mountain ash, trees sacred to the death goddess. But willow and yew were used in water divining. John Mitchell in The Earth Spirit theorizes that a stream of life-giving magnetic current passes through the land once a year, following certain paths, the season determined by position of the stars. Legendarily, this super energy transit was described as the god passing through. Sacred calendars related to local topography and myths and customs were based on a once unified system of awareness of the pathways of the Earth Spirit. Worldwide, the sacred energy pathways were marked by some human means: mounds, banks, ditches, dolmens, menhirs, and stone crosses, stone circles, terraces, and roads. In some places, the energy circuits were known as fairy paths, roads of psychic activity, and local peasant celebrations were timed to coincide with the current's passage. Processional and holy ways were located along raised serpent paths. Stone avenues representing the serpent lead up to Stonehenge, which is an ancient temple of the moon and the serpent. As Mitchell describes it, the mercurial earth current glides toward it like a serpent toward an egg, moving through the earth's crust. All stones in such monuments are believed to have strong healing powers, the rocks and boulders acting as vessels of this vital spirit. In all ceremonies, the goddess was seen to approach her shrine by a particular route. She both followed and made the energy path. Once she was accompanied by her nomadic celebrants. With permanent settlements and agriculture, these sacred journeys were imitated in religious processions. All these ceremonies were intended to energize and harmonize the people, as together they followed the path of the earth's magic life flow. And this is the real difference between ancient science and modern. Modern technologies tend to cut across the lines of the earth force, arbitrarily and unconsciously separating human activities from the energy radiations of the earth, and so setting humans and earth against each other in a force field of antagonistic vibrations. The old science and technology found ways to locate and tap the earth's natural force flow, integrating human and earth energies through ritual in a strong, harmonious field. The operating principle of the ancient beliefs was the analogy between macrocosm and microcosm. What was true of the earth's body was also true of the bodies of all the creatures on earth. And so, analogous with the ancient science of geomancy, it is another ancient technique, acupuncture. As Mitchell writes, quote, Chinese acupuncture treats the human body by regulating the currents of vital energy that flow through the skin as the geomancer treats the body of the earth. End quote. Kirlian photography has shown us that all the ancient acupuncture points are identical with points of great energy explosion on the skin's surface. We will find ways to take Kirlian's photos of the whole earth body, the globe's etheric body, and perhaps learn again to follow the earth of the energy charged serpent paths to the benefit of all life. Quote, it is cosmos to those who know the way and chaos to those who lose it. End quote. That is the end of chapter 21. So I said I was going to, I'm going to, let's see. The last two chapters are pretty short. And since I've divided this into two halves, I'll go ahead and finish reading it. So the last two chapters 22 and 23, is what I'm going to finish with tonight, because we're going to move into moon magic tomorrow. Chapter 22, Underground Caverns and Alchemic Mysteries. The power and effectiveness of shamans, witches, sibyls, druids emerges from their ability to communicate with the non-human, extraterrestrial, and subterranean forces, and the spirit world of the dead. The megalithic chambers of Malta and Gozo were places of such communication. And in Britain, also, there are rumored to be subterranean caverns, chambers of initiation and incantation, under Stonehenge, Glastonbury Tor, and other stone monuments. Underground chambers, called fogus or souterrains, are often found within enclosures of ancient villages in the western parts of Britain, and especially in Ireland. There is much speculation about their purpose. Three-dimensional underground mazes called weems were built by the ancient Picts of Scotland. The word weem relates to the word wumba, cave, and also wume or wame, womb. The Old English word for womb is wambe. The mysterious Tuatha de Danann, children of the goddess Danu, knew all the magical arts which they brought to Ireland. Driven underground by later Celtic invasions, they are still believed to dwell in the earth mounds and are the Irish fairies who serve as communicators of energy between the mortal and invisible worlds. All prehistoric monuments in Britain and globally are associated with the cult of the dead, a very exact ancient science of spiritual invocation and conscious direction of natural forces. The Irish fairy realm is the other world of the Mexican Nugual, the dream time of Australian Aborigines, the summerland of the immortal dead who live on in other dimensions of our total reality. It is the potentia of all possible energy and form. The Tuatha de Danann were also called Asade. Oh my gosh. The Asade, pronounced she, is, is a Gaelic word meaning fairy mound or realm of magical powers. It no doubt corresponds to the yogic term Sidhu, which also means magical or occult powers. Far from being crude and carnal as Christianity of antiquity were of subtle psychic nature, introducing initiates into the invisible world by means of heightened consciousness. In these rites, the human psyche experienced physical death and the transcendent state of future being. The mysteries were enacted in underground chambers from which all light was excluded, built to focus the earth's powerful energies on chamber and its occupants. Quote, behind this animated current is the mystery, hinted at in the catacombs of um, Ulysses, that may not fully be comprehended within the natural limits of the human experience, end quote. As the child is conceived within the mother's womb, so is the spirit conceived within the subterranean depths. Recent experiments conducted in caves suggest conditions for ESP, telepathy, precognition, and clairvoyance are more favorable in an underground environment. Perhaps the moist earth wholly surrounding such caverns dampens the electromagnetic radiation with which the brain is normally bombarded, allowing the psyche to receive other transdimensional radiations at transdimensional radiations. At any rate, as John Mitchell writes, oldest branch of alchemy was concerned to bring about the earthly paradise through the fruitful union of cosmic and terrestrial forces. Alchemy, geomancy, astrology were originally united in a system that recognized correspondences between planetary influences and the spirit of the earth's metals. End quote. Alchemy was a major continuation of the ancient mysteries and their symbols. The dragon in alchemy represents the flame of spirit. The dragon's fiery breath signifies transmutation of matter through intense heat. The philosopher's stone was the mystic condition through which all things could be transformed. All modern chemistry has its root in both practical and philosophical alchemy. Some kind of atomic theory was known to the ancients who, working always by analogy, believed in total correspondence between material and psychic processes, and thus their mutual influence and interaction. In Egypt, and as late as Roman rule there, many of the renowned inventions within the science of alchemy were created by women. Maria the Jewess, in particular, circa 1st century BC, invented practical instruments for laboratory research, including the alchemical steel. She is credited with improving all the essential appliances that would be necessary to alchemical and chemical research for the following 2,000 years. What we have left of alchemy, in addition to modern chemistry, are its symbols of psychic death, change, and rebirth through the process of alternating fusion and dissolution of opposite elements. This is a psychic rite, an earth spirit ritual, retaining much of the ancient goddess mysteries in distilled form within each individual psyche. The tarot card also retain a pictorial record of these ancient rites of transformation and process symbols. That is the end of chapter 22. So we will go on to the last chapter for the evening, and I will conclude tonight's reading. I don't know if you felt it. Tonight's reading, like all the rest, was a banger. Significant, right? Anyway, the last chapter, The Goddess at Avebury in Britain. This is chapter 23. So if you're reading along, so for those who may be tuning in later in the stream, The Great Cosmic Mother, Rediscovering the Religion of the Earth by Monica Zhu and Barbara Moore. If you download this book online, which you can for free, you can download the PDF. It does not align with the page numbers. So what I did with mine was just go through the chapters and actually number them because they don't have numbers. So I'm going into the last chapter reading for tonight, which is chapter 23. The Goddess at Avebury in Britain. Avebury on the Wiltshire Downs in the south of England was the sacred center of megalithic culture in Britain. Avebury's stone circle is the largest yet found in England. It dwarfs Stonehenge. There are 77 other stone circles or henges dating from the late Neolithic and the early Bronze Age. Avebury was built by pre-Celtic people living in a farming community circa 2600 BC. For thousands of years before its construction, the entire landscape of the surrounding area, stretching for about 37 miles, had been seen as the outline of the body of the goddess. Every hill, mound, stone, and long barrow was believed to form a part of her maternal body. The three stone circles at the causewayed camp at Windham Hill nearby predated Avebury by more than 600 years. The Avery monuments, which include Silbury Hill and West Kennet, Long Barrow, form a condensed sequence of visually sculpted images within the center of the larger and more ancient presence. They express together journeys of cosmic range and the entire yearly agricultural cycle within the space of the three fields. The monuments are aligned within the pubic triangle of two rivers meeting. These rivers were seen as superhuman bloodstreams gushing from the earth womb of the goddess. Here, every year anew, the goddess was born, grew into a maiden and lover, and became mother, and finally the old hag of death. The temples the temples were her seasonal reality, and the people moved with her from place to place in rhythm with the changing farming year. Our solar year is divided by solstices and equinoxes, but in the ritual calendar, the quarter days between were used as the major days and nights of celebration. To the ancients, the lunar and solar manifestation of these days were equally important. The celebration nights fall in early August, November, February, and May, and on the appropriate lunar phase nearest to the solar quarter day. These are the witches' sabbats of Lammas, Samhain, Imbolc, and Beltane. At the August or summer and February winter quarter days, nights, the moon and sun rose and set in alignment with the axis joining the two sacred springs at Avebury. Avebury's circle originally had 98 stones, some up to 18 feet high, enclosing an area of about 28 and a half acres. Two smaller circles stand within the large outer one. The earthworks surrounding horseshoe or circular space are bounded by a ditch with a bank beyond. Using only red deer antler picks and shovels made of ox shoulder blades, the people raised the earth bank nearly 50 feet above the ditch bottom, stretching almost a mile in circumference. Two serpentine stone avenues led into the circle. They were a mile and a half long, 50 feet wide, and were defined by 100 pairs of stones set at intervals of 80 feet. In shape, the stones were broad-hipped and long forms of the goddess, alive and powerful in her stance. The Christian church began its long fight against the Avebury stones in the year 634, smashing them or exorcising them with the sign of the cross. Both inner circles were destroyed sometime after the year 1700, and many of the other stones were demolished or simply buried. This was at the height of the witch hunts, and these ritual stones of the goddess, just like her priestesses, the witches, were actually tortured and exorcised by Christian priests. The stones were burnt, chipped, mutilated. The institution of private property finally brought about at the end to the sacred stones, with the enclosure of common land by private wealthy farmers. The emergence of the landless proletariat and the modern notion of individual progress at the expense of the community fittingly coincided with the fall of the great mother of Avebury, baby. What? Of the original stones in West Kennet Avenue, 72 were left in 1722. By 1934, only 4 were still standing, with 9 left fallen. In 1937, a Scots industrialist bought up the land, restored the ditch and earthworks, which had been serving as a rubbish dump, and dug up and reinstalled 43 of the buried megaliths. The long Avebury avenues represented the bisexual snake dragon goddess, female and male in one. The West Kennet Avenue originated at the Serpent's tail end from the sanctuary, once a circular temple labyrinth of complex timber structures covered with a conical roof. This might have been the puberty temple, where young women of the community were initiated into the mysteries of farming, sexuality, and childbirth in the springtime season of plowing and preparation of the seedbed. The young women re-entered her womb within the sanctuary, which is Silbury Hill at a different season. Her here, the goddess is the hibernating spring quarter serpent, just reawakening from her long winter deep sleep. On February 1st at Imbolc, the Feast of Lights was celebrated. Torches carried processionally in the night to help the goddess return from the underworld to be reborn again. At the tail end of Beckhampton Stone Avenue, with its more phallic-shaped stones, was the male counterpart to the sanctuary, doubtless a temple for male initiation. Avebury Circle is where the young women and men met, after dancing and winding their way up the avenues in imitation of the serpent at midnight of the waxing moon of the May quarter day. This stone circle forms both an enlarged cunt and a great head, the inner circles forming the lunar and solar eyes. It is also a world island surrounded by the cosmic ocean, and its hidden power and secret is the sacred underground water that seeps into the ditch in the spring. Here the unborn fetuses dwell. Avebury Henge was the goddess of love incarnate, the proper place of conception. Here was celebrated the communal yearly May festival wedding in orgiastic rites, the entire community dancing with upraised arms on the outer banks in imitation of the horned new moon. This was Beltane. The maiden becomes a mother, and so the next stage of the cycle was centered at Silbury Hill, the pregnant womb of the goddess, the creation cone. Here, as already described, the people gathered on the summit on the night of the full moon at Lammas, the August quarter day night to watch the harvest child being born. With oncoming winter, the goddess becomes the lady of the tombs, the hag of death, the mother of the dead. Her dwelling is now at West Kennet, Loughborough, where she retreats into the underworld after Samhain or Hallowmas. This borough is 340 feet long and shaped in her gigantic image. The image of the Silbury mother is repeated within the chambers that represent the vagina, birth passage, and uterus, but here is made hollow to receive the dead, who were buried within her in the fetal position. The 30 chamber stones of West Kennet might form a lunar monthly count. There is no water associated with this borough, no spring, no stream. All is dryness and barrenness. There are only rivers of stone. West Kennet Loughborough was built in 3500 BC. It is a Stone Age horned grave, tomb, womb, temple, and it is older than Avebury and Silbury Hill. The people were buried within it collectively without distinction of class or hierarchy. It was ritually frequented by the living as well as the dead. Megalithic culture is far older than once was supposed. Traces of a megalithic farming community have been found in County Tyrone, Ireland, dating back 4500 BC. Patriarchal Bronze Age culture was first brought to Britain circa 2000 BC by the taller, warlike, aggressive Beaker people. In 2600 BC, the entrance to the West Kennet Loughborough was sealed off with huge megaliths, great stones. These stones formed the body of an ox. The goddess was moon and ox, one and bisexual. She is the ox lady. She emerges miraculously out of death through the sacred bull. There was continued veneration of the tomb during the late Neolithic culture. On Samhain in November, the winter quarter day, A winter eve ox was sacrificed here on the night of the no moon. The ox was ridden by the queen of death, and the ox is miraculously reborn in the spring. The winter goddess lived on in folk memory as Black Anise. She was remembered as a great mountain builder and a gigantic hag. There are also sacred hills in Ireland named for her, the Paps of Anu, or Anu's breasts. Pervading all the earthworks and stoneworks of Avebury was the desire to be close to the earth. The people drew strength from her in birth, in life, and in death. The monuments could clearly not have been built with slave labor, but were the love labor of farmers, women and men who were in tune with great psychic physical powers. To carry through such a task, they lived a peaceful existence. Perhaps natural magic energy was released from the earth and used on an everyday basis by the people. Ancient myths of the dragon serpent guarding a mysterious symbolic treasures perhaps refer to lost secrets of crop fertility, a hidden power running in fertility currents through the countryside. The story goes that anyone who tastes the dragon's blood became at one with nature and forever understands the songs of the birds. Perhaps this is the bloodstream of the mother gushing from the earth at sacred wells. The ancients knew that some wells and stones, drunk or touched or embraced in a certain way, and at certain times of the year, could regenerate and revitalize people and animals. Sacred stones seem to contain and emit a force that periodically waxes and wanes. Beneath each active standing stone, there appears to be a crossing of underground water streams. The movement of water through a tunnel of earth, particularly through clay soil, creates a small electrical field for which the stone acts as an amplifier. When this energy power emerges from the ground, it does so in the form of a spiral ascending in 7 coils, the lowest 2 beneath the ground. This is not a stable phenomenon, but waxes and wanes, changing polarity every month. After waning, it dies away for a few days, and then waxes in the opposite direction. It cyclically increases and decreases until the end of the lunar phase. The study of the moon's orbit was essential to megalithic builders. The people of the moon, the stones, and the serpent goddess. The stones might also have functioned as a means of communication over long distances, since the magnetic force that activates the stones also links them in a continuous chain of vibrations. The ley lines, paths for the force, interlock in a cobweb of stones, circles, mounds, and barrows all over the earth. But the stone circles would not have been fully activated unless the calendrical events were accompanied by human rituals and dance. Ooh. Sometimes sacrifice, which focused the forces and fixed them in the stones. Fire, like water, was essential to the workings of the monuments and their hidden power. At May Day night was the moment when Beltane fires were lit from hilltop to hilltop to celebrate the coming of the new moon. On May Day, the people drank from the sacred well and circled it 9 times. The May Day sunrise links Avebury in a direct line with Glastonbury Tor some 40 miles away. Glastonbury looks as human-made as Silbury Hill, but was actually shaped by volcanic rock violently thrown into the sky in an otherwise flat and marshy land. Glastonbury's spiral path, however, was molded by human hands. It is a 3-dimensional labyrinth, rising up in the Tor in 7 circuits. Nearby is sacred Chalice Well, anciently called the Blood Well, because of its miraculously healing blood-stained waters. Not far from Glastonbury is Wokie Hole, an ancient cave where the rites of the winter death goddess were probably enacted. According to the myth, in this cave lived a terrible and bloodthirsty witch who demanded human sacrifice. She was supposedly finally exorcised by the Christian monk from Glastonbury. The persistent British myth of the slumbering giant Albion and the return of King Arthur and the Golden Age, it really is really the legend of the reemergence of the goddess and her people, the Great Mother and the cosmic harmony we lost with Avebury. Today we live truly in the mythic wasteland of patriarchy, awaiting her rebirth and return with the spring of re-emerging women cultures. That is the end of chapter 23. So I will be closing for the evening. Tomorrow night, I will be reading chapters 23 through 24. Again, check out the description below. Support, if you will, by liking, commenting, and sharing and hitting the notification bell. And also, if you need any other kinds of information, you can email me, which is located in the description below. And thank you again for the reading of the Great Cosmic Mother, Rediscovering the Religion of the Earth.